Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going deep on Rachel Dolezal.
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, she really got people talking about race, identity, the whole bit. I mean, is it even possible to completely reinvent yourself like that?
It's a question as old as time. Are they legit or are they just playing us, you know?
Exactly. Grifter or gifted? Today, we're diving deep to figure that out.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so we've got a ton of material for this one. We've got excerpts from Dolezal's own book in full color.
Oh, I read that one. It's something else.
Right. And we've got a bunch of interviews she's given, plus some encyclopedia stuff, just for context. But, like, the real heart of this deep dive
Yeah, get to the juicy part.
is Rachel Dolezal a true innovator, someone pushing boundaries, or is she a con artist, someone exploiting a really sensitive issue for personal gain?
Well, that's the million-dollar question.
It is. And to help us unpack all this, we've got our expert here ready to go.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
So, ready to get into the nitty-gritty of this whole thing?
Let's do it. I think it's really helpful to start with a little historical context.
Absolutely. When you
Okay.
look at Dolezal's story, it has echoes of this thing called passing. It was really big during the Jim Crow era.
Passing.
Yeah, when people of color would basically try to pass as white to
Right.
escape, all that horrible discrimination and violence, just trying to survive.
Makes sense. But Dolezal's case is, well, the opposite, right?
Exactly. She's white, but she claims a black identity. It flips the whole script and makes you wonder, what's her deal? What are her motives?
Right. And then you add in her background. Grew up super strict Christian Montana.
Mhm.
And get this, her parents adopted 4 black children.
Yeah, that's where things get messy. Dolezal says her parents were, totally altruistic, purely good intentions. But some sources say maybe not so much. Maybe some financial incentives were involved.
Wow, so that casts a different light on things.
It does, and it makes you wonder about the environment she grew up in. Dolezal talks a lot about feeling a connection to black culture through her siblings and this church she went to in Mississippi.
Oh yeah, I read about that. That church was deep into black aesthetics, culture, everything.
Right. But you can't just ignore those contrasting viewpoints about her family.
It's definitely complex. And it gets even more complex when you see how she started presenting herself as black,
It's a transformation, for sure. It all seemed to kick off when she went to Howard University.
which, for anyone who doesn't know, is a historically black university.
Exactly. So she's at this HBCU, and that's when she really starts constructing this black identity.
Darkening her skin, changing her hairstyle.
Teaching African American studies?
She even sued Howard, claiming discrimination.
Yeah, and that one didn't go her way. Lost that case.
So strange, like claiming discrimination while at the same time building this whole black identity. It's almost like she was trying to have it both ways.
It does make you think about that line between genuine allyship, really supporting a cause, and just appropriating a culture for your own gain.
Yeah, where's the line? And this is also when her career starts popping off.
Spokane NAACP, remember? She was leading that chapter, presenting as a black woman.
She even got into art, although there were some whispers about plagiarism with her artwork.
Yeah, that's important. Was she just drawn to black culture? Or was she trying to profit off of it? Big questions there.
And then it all unravels. Journalists start digging into her background, find out her parents are white, no black ancestry anywhere.
Boom. Instant national news. Everyone's talking about her, and not in a good way.
Forced her to resign from the NAACP.
Yeah, and the public reaction was just, wow, explosive. Some were like, she's a fraud. Cultural appropriation at its worst.
Others were like, more understanding.
Right. Some folks were like, hey, maybe she's just trying to live her truth. But it was definitely a huge controversy.
Dolezal kept saying it was all about race as a social construct. Like that explained everything.
That phrase, it's thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean?
Good question. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So basically, race as a social construct is this big idea in sociology. It says that race, it isn't some hard biological fact.
It's not like written in your DNA or something.
Right. It's a concept, something society created to, categorize people, rank them. There are physical differences, sure, but the meaning we give those differences, that's made up.
Okay, I think I'm following, but how does that apply to Dolezal? Can you just choose your race if it's all made up anyway?
That's the debate, right. Dolezal's argument is, since race is a social construct, it's fluid. You define it. She's saying she feels Black, ancestry aside. But a lot of people, especially in the Black community, pushed back hard on that. They said she's missing the point. The history of being Black in America, the real lived experience, that's not something you can just pick and choose.
Yeah, it's not just an abstract idea.
Exactly. Race may be a construct, but it has real-world consequences, like systemic racism, oppression. You can't just ignore that.
So Dolezal's using a real concept, but maybe not in the right way.
It's complicated, and then there's the fact that she seems to be, well, profiting from all this. The book, the talk show appearances, she even tried to be a hair braider.
It's like, is it self-expression or is it exploitation?
Exactly. And that brings us to this whole idea of pretendians, people faking a marginalized identity, often for personal gain.
Wow, so this isn't just about Dolezal, it's a bigger phenomena.
It is. It pops up everywhere. Academia, the arts, even politics.
And what's the damage? What's the harm in that?
Well, for starters, it's about appropriating and profiting from the struggles of communities that have actually faced oppression.
So we're left with a tangled web here. On one hand, Dolezal's claiming this self-identified identity.
On the other, her actions might be causing real harm to the Black community.
It's messy. As we dig deeper, I think we need to keep coming back to that core question.
The big one, yeah.
Visionary, pushing the boundaries of what we think about race. Or con artist, exploiting a sensitive issue for personal gain.
It's a conversation we need to have, for sure. And it's not just about Dolezal. It's about recognizing the history. You know, Black people in America, for centuries, they've been denied the right to even say who they are.
To self-identify.
Exactly. So when a white woman comes along and claims that right, it's going to hit a nerve.
Makes sense. We can't just ignore that history, that power dynamic.
Nope. And Dolezal, she's right in the middle of it. It's this tension between, like, what an individual wants to express versus, like, the collective identity of a group.
Right, like everyone has the right to say who they are, but some identities, they're built on shared history, shared struggles. You can't just pick and choose.
It's a tightrope walk. Okay, so let's talk about how Dolezal's whole story blew up.
Yeah, the turning point.
So we're in Spokane, Washington, right? Where she's living, working. These journalists, they start sniffing around, asking questions.
Investigative journalism, old school.
Yep. And they find out her parents, white. No Black ancestry, like, at all.
Wow.
Suddenly, it's national news. Everyone's talking about it. Dolezal has to resign from the NAACP.
Crazy how quickly things changed. She went from hero to zero in like a week.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the NAACP. Eastern Washington University, she was teaching Africana studies there, right? Gone. Ombudsman Commission. Kicked off that, too. They did an investigation, found some misconduct, intimidation, harassment, that kind of thing.
Yikes. So she lost it all.
Pretty much. But here's the thing. Even after all that, she still insisted she was Black. Evidence be damned.
Which just made people even angrier.
Oh, yeah. It raised the question, was she ever really fighting for racial justice, or was this all just a way to get ahead?
Using a fake identity.
Yep. And this is where the whole transracial debate comes in. Can you choose your race the same way some people say you can choose your gender?
Big question.
Huge. The public, they're more open to trans identities now, but when Dolezal said she was Black, people freaked out.
It's like there's a difference in how society sees those two things.
There is. I think it's because of the history of race in America. Transgender people, they're fighting to live as their true selves, often against huge societal pressure. But race, it's tied up with slavery, segregation, all this oppression.
So saying you're Black when you haven't actually lived that experience, it comes across as disrespectful.
Exactly. You're trivializing a real struggle. Race may be a construct, but you can't just play dress up with it. It's not a costume.
So let's talk about Dolezal's book in full color. That's where she lays out her whole perspective, right?
Yeah, that's her story. One thing that jumps out is how she talks about her childhood, specifically when her family adopted those 4 Black kids.
Right, right. She says her parents were totally selfless, just wanted to give those kids a good home.
Pure love. Except her parents came out and said, well, not exactly. They hinted that maybe there was some money involved, some financial incentives.
Oh, interesting. So whose story is the real story?
Who knows? It makes you wonder, can we trust anything Dolezal says? Is she twisting the truth, or is she just remembering things differently?
Maybe a bit of both. Dolezal also talks about these transracial feelings she had, even as a kid.
Yeah.
Compares it to being transgender.
A lot of people had a problem with that. There's real discrimination, real danger. This isn't the same thing.
And it's like she's saying, because race is a construct, It
Yeah.
means you can just decide what race you are.
And that misses all the nuance. Race is complex. Yes, it's a construct, but it has real-world impacts, especially for people who've been marginalized, oppressed. It's not a game.
She spent time at Howard and HBCU. You'd think that experience would have given her some perspective.
You'd think so, right? But even her stories about Howard, some people who knew her back then, they've said, hold on, that's not how it went down. They say she wasn't as deep into Black culture as she makes it seem.
And don't forget, she sued Howard for discrimination.
Yep. Lost that case too. It's like she wants to be a victim of the system, while at the same time she's being accused of exploiting that same system.
Okay, so we've got the book, we've got the news stories, but there's also that documentary, The Rachel Divide.
Yeah, that one takes a different approach. It's more personal. Tries to understand Dolezal as a person, not just a headline.
Gives her a little more humanity.
Right. But it also shows how much her family is hurting. They're caught in the middle of this whole mess.
Especially of sons.
Oh, yeah. They're trying to figure out their own identities while their mom is out there doing this whole thing.
Franklin, her biological son, he's biracial. He's not happy with her at all.
But Isaiah, her adopted son, he seems more supportive.
Wow, so even within the family, there's no easy answer.
Nope. And the documentary, it doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. Like Dolezal's adopted sister, Esther, she accused their parents of sexual abuse.
Oh, wow. I didn't know about that.
It's heavy stuff. The
Yeah.
documentary tries to show all sides, the good and the bad.
It doesn't make Dolezal a hero or a villain. It just, lets you see her and her family and the whole situation in all its messiness.
Exactly. It makes you think, you know? There are no easy answers here. So where is Dolezal now? What's she doing these days?
Yeah, good question. Did she just disappear after all this?
Well, she tried a few things. After she stepped down from everything, she tried being a hair braider, even wrote a book about Black hairstyles, but that one got hit with plagiarism accusations too.
She couldn't stay away from controversy, could she?
Seems not. In 2017, she released her memoir, in full color, Finding My Place in a Black and White World. Tried to explain herself, you know.
Did it work? Did people buy it?
Mixed bag. Some critics were like, okay, she's trying to be honest to understand herself. Others were like, this is just PR. She's not taking responsibility.
So is she still claiming to be Black?
Yep. Still says she identifies as Black, still talks about racial justice. But her platform, it's not what it used to be. Not even close.
And she had some legal trouble, right?
Oh, yeah. Welfare fraud, perjury, 2018. Basically, she got public assistance, but she wasn't supposed to. Lied about some things.
So there were consequences.
There were. In the end, she had to pay back the money and do some community service.
Her story, it's kind of a warning. Be careful how you reinvent yourself. There are lines you shouldn't cross.
It's about knowing who you are, but it's also about respecting other people's identities, especially if they faced oppression. You can't just take that on as your own.
We've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
Dolezal's life, her choices, the impact on others.
A whole lot of messiness.
What sticks with you the most? What's the key takeaway?
For me, it's how complicated race and identity are in America. Dolezal, she throws a wrench into everything, makes us ask, what does it even mean to be Black? To be white? What does it mean to belong?
She forces us to confront our own assumptions.
And maybe that's a good thing, even if it's uncomfortable. It really is a fascinating case, you know? Dolezal, her story, it's like
A mirror.
a mirror. Yeah, like a Rorschach test. People looked at her and they saw their own beliefs about race reflected back.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. It's like she tapped into this nerve, this cultural anxiety about like belonging, being real, all of that. And the way people reacted, super intense.
It's like everyone had an opinion and they weren't afraid to share it.
Exactly. So as we wrap this whole thing up, I'm curious, big picture, what did we learn from all this? What are the takeaways?
What do you think from an expert perspective?
I think the biggest thing is we need to talk about race more openly, honestly.
Which would be hard.
It is. But Dolezal, she forced the issue, made us think about appropriation, privilege, the harm it can cause when you take on an identity that's not yours.
Whether you agree with her or not, she made us think about it.
Exactly. It was messy, it was uncomfortable, but that's how progress happens, right? You got to get uncomfortable.
Totally. Another thing that got me was how Dolezal, she controlled her own story. Like, she was the one telling everyone who she was. And like in today's world with social media and everything.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge point. We're bombarded with information all the time. It's easy to create a fake persona online. You could be anyone.
So we got to be careful, be critical. Don't just believe everything you read.
Think for yourself. Do your research. Don't take anyone's word for granted, especially when it comes to something as important as race.
And we have to listen to the people who actually lived these experiences.
Yes. Black voices, voices of color, they need to be front and center in these conversations. We need to learn from them, amplify their stories.
This deep dive, it's been a lot. So much information, so many different angles. And as we wrap up, I'm realizing I have more questions now than I did when we started.
That's the thing about Dolezal. Her story, it messes with your head, makes you question everything you thought you knew about race, about identity. It's like, what even makes us who we are? Is it something we choose? Or is it something we're born with?
Deep questions.
The deepest. And I think that's why people are still talking about her, even all these years later.
She makes us uncomfortable, but she also makes us think.
And maybe that's not a bad thing.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. It's been real.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about these things. The more we talk, the more we understand, right?
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in to The Deep Dive. Keep those brains working. Keep asking those tough questions. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into another fascinating and maybe a little bit controversial figure. Until then, stay curious.